I want to especially thank this panel and introduce MR, the founder and chairman of Indiaspora. He needs no introduction, but I'm introducing him anyway. And he is also the founder of Corporate Eco Forum since 2007. I'll pass it on to you, MR, our Indiaspora's own climate guru.
Thank you. I don't claim to be a guru, but I'm Indian. But in any case, this has been a riveting discussion so far, right from the very beginning. And to continue that in the spirit of nonpartisanship, we have two terrific people who will join me now. And this will be a civil discourse between a Republican and a Democrat. How about that? So we have Neil Chatterjee, who was in the prior Trump administration. He was the chair of the FERC, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and has been on the Republican side for a long time. And on the other side, we have David Livingston, who's the chief strategy officer at Galvanize, a very large venture capital and private equity firm investing in climate. He was in the prior two administrations, the Obama administration and also the Biden-Harris administration. So we have two amazing people with us, and we want to start by asking them both their perspective on energy. There's a whole debate today, Neil and David, between energy security and energy independence, and what happens there for the United States. So Neil, you want to jump in and describe your landscape today in terms of where we're at?
Yeah, great. And thank you again for having me. I think, I tend to look at things from the standpoint of energy demand. This is something that we're going to have to confront in the US in a way in which we really haven't had to for the better part of the last 2 decades. We've had relatively flat demand for energy and electricity in the US. And that is about to be totally upended by technologies like AI and data centers necessary to support AI, and crypto and Bitcoin mining and semiconductor manufacturing, a reshoring of manufacturing in the US, vehicle electrification, building electrification. All of these things are incredibly energy intense in nature and are going to require a tremendous amount of electric power. How we procure that power in a way that enables Americans to have not just a reliable source of energy and electricity, but also an affordable one, in my view, is going to upend energy politics. I think today there's no question the incoming Trump administration is very much focused on the ethos of the first Trump administration and the campaign of kind of drill, baby, drill, with a heavy emphasis on fossil fuels and taking a negative view towards cleaner sources of energy. I think over the course of time, that is going to change. Donald Trump essentially made two promises to the American people when it came to energy. One was to win the AI race for national security purposes with an understanding that that will require a tremendous amount of electric power. And two was to significantly bring down the cost of electricity for Americans who are suffering under inflationary pressure. In order to achieve those two objectives, I think both political parties in the US are going to have to reevaluate their thinking. On the political left, I think there has to be a recognition that we cannot possibly meet the coming surge in demand for energy while maintaining reliability and affordability without fossil fuels for the future. Particularly natural gas. We're going to need it. And I think on the political right, there has to be a recognition that we can't possibly meet this surge in demand with fossil fuels alone, that we will need solar and storage and hydrogen and nuclear, and also negawatts like demand response and energy efficiency and distributed energy resources. And I think that we have an opportunity, really driven by AI, to rethink how the political process evolves around energy policy.
Fantastic. Thanks, Neil. And David, over to you. What is your response?
Well, I have to say it's less of a response and more, unfortunately, of a nodding agreement. I think Neil is spot on. I mean, look, I have always considered myself a pragmatist, including when working with Secretary Kerry on advancing a sort of thoughtful and well-managed energy transition. It's now clear, to Neil's point, that we're engaged in an energy transition that's also an energy addition. The world is hungry for more energy, particularly in developed economies and in the United States, and certain key corridors in the United States, including Northern Virginia, deeply hungry for new electrons. And I think that if you look at where the demand for those new electrons is coming from, yes, it's manufacturing. Yes, it is just sort of traditional drivers of load growth. But of course, we also have this AI infrastructure boom that's an overlay that's giving us a dramatic re-rating upwards in the sort of load growth that we've seen in the past several years. In fact, actually, the past couple of decades. What's unique about that I want to point out is that the drivers of that, the so-called hyperscalers, right? The Google, the OpenAI, the Meta, the Netflix, the Amazon Web Services, the Microsoft of the world, have a higher willingness to pay than perhaps your traditional sources of marginal electricity demand. And there's probably also, if you consider this to be an AI race, this race for AI sovereignty, AI dominance, as Neil was saying, you consider this also to be something where time is a commodity, then there's a higher premium as well placed on speed to power. What can you get deployed, built on the grid fastest? And I think when you look along both of those dimensions, as Neil pointed out, this administration, any utility, regardless of your ideological background or position, is probably going to find that there's a very significant role for renewables, in particular solar plus storage, as both a option which is increasingly cost competitive with new build gas, especially when you consider that you talk with Siemens, GE Vernova, et cetera, there are bottlenecks in the supply chain of aeroderivative turbines in particular that mean that if you want to sort of get a new CCGT built, get in line, and it's not going to be something that you build before 2030, given some of the bottlenecks in that supply chain. And so the costs also are looking more like $2,000 a kilowatt upwards. That means that solar plus storage starts to become very cost competitive on a new build basis with new gas, and is actually faster to build as well. You're talking 12 to 24 months, even with some of the trade and tariff disruptions that we've seen. You're adding, a few hundred basis points on the total utility scale solar project cost. You're still in the money. It's still, a good option in terms of speed to power. And then, to Neil's point, it also puts an increased importance on the existing gas fleet and the role of gas peakers in accommodating some of that new, both intermittent renewable as well as somewhat smoothed out renewable with 4-hour storage equipped to it that's going to be coming on the grid in many of these places. To Neil's other point on negawatts, I think negawatts and flexibility, grid flexibility, new technologies that allow us to get more out of our existing grid, what some call grid enhancing technologies. Our venture growth team is invested in a company called Veer, that's a reconductoring firm that enhances the capacity of existing power lines using new innovative technologies and materials. There is going to be an increased premium on new AI-based software control layers for grids so that we dispatch resources more intelligently in an orchestra, in a symphony rather than a cacophony of different resources on the grid. And I think that there's also going to be an increased role over time for virtual power plants and other ways of harnessing sort of the flexible load that we have on the grid in ways that allow us to reduce system costs, reduce costs for consumers, get the most out of what we have, even as we importantly, by the way, work towards building the next generation of baseload technologies, SMRs, perhaps a renaissance for also the traditional Westinghouse AP1000 style large-scale nuclear, but that's a 2030 story. And then heading into the 2030s, even as some will deploy some new gas, I think there's also an exciting role for things like enhanced geothermal. Companies like Fervo that are leading the way on taking lessons from the Shell revolution and applying it towards clean baseload electricity using the Earth's heat. So the U.S. has a lot of options in front of it. And I think that anyone, regardless of ideological stripe, is going to sort of say, okay, we're just net short electrons. How do we get the most out of today's grid, and how do we get new resources deployed the fastest?
Great. Great response to that. And I think I see some violent agreement between the two of you at this point. But, earlier today we had a talk from Varun Sivaram. Both of you probably know him as well, who's now at the Council of Foreign Relations. And he started talking about climate realism. And that's what I see from both of you here is pragmatism, realism, whatever you want to call it. So in that vein, the United States is marching forward both with fossil fuel, but also with new technologies. One of the things that he pointed out at that time was that most of the emissions in energy is not coming from the US, right? It's coming from China and India and all the growing markets. So, what is the United States' role in creating technologies, exporting technologies from here to kind of solve the overall energy crisis throughout the world? Neil, any ideas?
Yeah. Yeah, one of the exciting things that I got to work on during my tenure as Commissioner and Chairman of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission is I actually signed several memorandums of understanding with my counterpart agencies in India, with CERC, with the PNGRB, and the MOUs were predicated around the idea that the U.S. would not actually try to export a commodity or sell something to the Indian government, but what we would do was provide our expertise. We in the US have had tremendous success in deploying markets when it comes to energy and electricity, capacity markets, energy markets, ancillary services markets. And in our multi-decade experiment with markets, we've learned a great deal from what works and what doesn't work. And what we've been able to do is squeeze carbon out of the US power sector without sacrificing reliability and while driving down costs. And that has had tremendous benefits for consumers, for the economy, and for the environment. And so what we tried to do, and the program was maintained by my successors at FERC, was engage with India and basically enable our Indian regulatory counterparts to learn from us so they could design a grid that is not just sustainable in India, but one that could provide reliable service while bringing down costs and driving down emissions. And I think that is obviously a clear role that the US can play, in addition to things like exporting commodities like liquefied natural gas. I'll point out that we in the US, even though LNG is a fossil fuel, it is still displacing dirtier sources of fuel overseas, including in India, including in parts of Southeast Asia. And having US LNG displace more fossil-intense sources of fuel actually does play a role in lowering global carbon emissions. And so I think there's a lot that the US can do in this space. And I have firsthand experience with India specifically on how the US can leverage our experience and expertise to help our allies design a grid for the future.
Awesome. And I know, David, you had a lot of work done as well in the Kerry, with Secretary Kerry and so forth. What's your take on the US's role in energy across the globe?
Well, to Neil's point, I mean, the U.S. is still the engine of energy innovation globally. China obviously plays a pronounced role in terms of the manufacturing of what one might call mature commodity clean energy technologies. But India is increasingly seeking to kind of come in there and play that role as well, right? And not cede that market completely to China. I view it'll be interesting to see where bilateral trade negotiations with India shake out under this administration. But if the Trump administration is pragmatic and sort of open-minded and big tent about this, there's a real opportunity to not only increase the role of U.S. hydrocarbons at a lower carbon footprint than India's coal in helping them reduce their emissions, clean their air, et cetera, so long as there is attention paid to the upstream methane emissions in the United States, which is an important caveat I would just add. But not only that, but there's also a role to help India to diversify supply chains globally of the sorts of technologies we're going to need to get the cheapest possible electrons on our grid here in the United States. So as you see the U.S. putting tariffs on certain Southeast Asian countries that it believes have, played a role in sort of circumventing China circumventing tariffs on the export of solar and other clean energy commodities and inputs that it believes that have been dumped or sold at below market or with unfair competition. There's a real opportunity for India to step up here and play a bigger role, not only in deploying clean energy, but also in global clean energy supply chains. As a manufacturer of solar and solar inputs, wind and wind turbine inputs, et cetera. That hopefully can come out of a more stable equilibrium from these U.S.-India negotiations. In addition, we did a lot of work, obviously, Secretary Kerry, myself, in the past administration, engaging with India on their energy transition and helping to strengthen the partnership between the U.S. and India. Now with Galvanize, we're looking at India as one of the most exciting markets in the world, and one which is actually a unique position given the kind of trade and geoeconomic bipolarity that we see between the U.S. and China. This is really, India's decade and decades ahead. It is an incredibly fast-growing market. You have multiple, scale renewable developer champions in India. We, through our public equities fund, are very familiar with Renew, which is an incredibly professional company and well-run company that's developing renewables at scale in India. I think that is a large enough market that is going to give birth not only to a couple of new sort of large scale players, but it's also going to create regional players that go outside of India's borders and increasingly are incredibly important players in the region as well. I think it's in the U.S.'s interest to find ways to link up very closely with that and to intertwine ourselves even more with India. And then finally, the thing I would just say is we face actually many of the same challenges, especially when it comes to building out the grid, when it comes to building out transmission cables, to dealing with, sort of NIMBY issues and traditional sort of land, and right-of-way issues with farmers and different, different challenges such as that. So to the degree that we can implement also reconductoring technologies, grid-enhancing technologies, the use of drones for better transmission cable laying, this whole suite of sort of technologies that can help us build out the backbone of our energy systems faster, more effectively, and with less disruption. That's a huge area, I think, for U.S.-India cooperation down the road also.
Great. Neil, let me come to how do we advance our infrastructure and product set in the energy sector itself? So are there some new technologies you see on the horizon that can help improve the grid in the United States, help improve efficiency? Can you talk a little bit? I'm sure you've been approached by lots of technology companies and others. Can you kind of talk a little bit about what you're seeing out in the market?
Yeah, look, there's a lot of exciting innovation out there. Look, we need to build more in this country, and particularly when it comes to energy infrastructure, whether it be electric transmission lines to bring more energy onto the grid, or natural gas pipelines to deliver gas to regions where we're short capacity. And in the interim, because it is a challenge, as David pointed out, to build in the U.S., and we do need legislative permitting reform to better enable us to overcome things like NIMBYism, not in my backyardism, which is not political, it's not ideological. Americans don't want energy infrastructure coming through their property, whether it's a transmission line to deliver clean energy or a pipeline to deliver gas. And so that's a hurdle. And so while we wrestle with that hurdle, we need to look to technologies like grid enhancing technologies, like dynamic line ratings or ambient adjusted ratings that enable us to get the maximum amount of efficiency out of our existing energy infrastructure. We need to look to AI and a consumer marketplace that better enables efficiency and the utilization of innovative AI technologies to make energy consumption more efficient in the US. We need to get ahead of things like wildfire risk and mitigate some of those risks. And we can use satellite imagery and AI in that regard. So there's a lot of exciting things that technical innovation can do. I was proud when I was at FERC of proposing initiatives that removed barriers to entry for technologies like aggregated distributed energy resources. Here, think rooftop solar or electric vehicles or advanced appliances, plus energy storage, and enable these resources to be compensated for all of their attributes in the markets. It's these kinds of, proactive, regulatory mechanisms that can be used to drive the growth in deployment of these innovative new technologies that are great for the environment, but also for consumers and the economy.
Great. And David, you have a vantage point of all the new stuff coming down the horizon. Are there one or two technologies you look at that can really, maybe not a silver bullet, but get us on a track to do better in the energy space in the US, both within the country in terms of security, but also in terms of helping the globe?
Look, as you noted, there are no silver bullets here. I mean, I think the one thing that is transferable from finance to energy is that it is the best thing is to have a robust and diversified portfolio. The future is uncertain. We thought we were in a period of stagnant load for decades to come. Turns out we're in a period of load growth, right? You can't predict where there are going to be wars, where there are going to be trade wars, where there are going to be tariffs, the volatility of fossil fuel prices. So a portfolio approach is always best. In the near term, I am most excited by technologies that help us get more out of the grid and help get more out of the flexibility of resources that utilities and energy companies are managing globally. There's a great company that's born in the UK, but has now become a really global energy player called Octopus Energy. We were one of the first investors in them, really innovative utility for those who are familiar with it in the UK. They have a software system that's now open to any utility in the world called Kraken, that's helping to manage both the customer experience and sort of the assets on the grid in a much more intelligent way. Those sorts of AI enabled, AI is not just a source of energy demand, it's also a solution for many of our challenges. And it's going to help us, again, have this orchestra of different resources act as a symphony instead of a cacophony on the grid. So when it comes to the sorts of software that Octopus is developed with Kraken, when it comes to companies like Ascend Analytics that are doing similar things to help manage today's resources on the grid better, and then also companies like Veer that are getting more out of the physical grid today. That's the best thing in the near term that excites me. And then over the medium term, I think that things like enhanced geothermal are the perfect complement to the nature of demand we have coming from data centers, right? Clean, 24/7 baseload energy that you can co-locate next to a data center in places like, Nevada, in places like Utah, in places like Virginia and Data Center Alley. That's really exciting. And then I think in the medium term, that's sort of the next wave of energy technology that's going to be commercialized at scale. And then, of course, US maintains a strength in the next wave, things like fusion, et cetera, that excite so many of us and that have benefited from sustained US government R&D support over the years as well.
Great. And Neil, I'll let you close out the session. We're out of time. What do you see happen in the Trump administration over the next 4 years in terms of energy and energy security?
Yeah, look, I think they're going to surprise people. I do think we're going to see the administration shift away from drill, baby, drill, and that heavy emphasis on fossil fuels and look more to winning the AI race while bringing down costs for Americans. I also think that while they will not couch their rhetoric in regards to these policies in the language of climate change, make no mistake, some of the policies they will pursue, including on the trade front, will have positive benefits to lowering in terms of lowering global carbon emissions. So you may see the administration deleting references to climate, across various government agencies. And I know that can be dispiriting to folks, but if you actually take a step back and look at the policies I believe the administration will pursue over the next 4 years, I believe that much like at the end of the first Trump administration, we will see a decline in carbon emissions coming out of the second Trump administration.
Great. On that positive note, I want to thank thank both of you, David and Neil, for your great perspective. And I'll turn the floor back to Amita on our side. Thank you.
Thanks, Amar.